Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the second webinar in the 2025-2026 FCM Collective Series. We're pleased to convene an important conversation about financing for housing enabling infrastructure, and particularly those big ticket water systems. My name is Evan Clark, and I'm the Manager of Partnerships and Sponsorships at FCM. I'm pleased to welcome our presenting partners from the Canada Infrastructure Bank to discuss how their flexible financing programs are helping to deliver critical infrastructure in some of Manitoba's fastest growing communities. If I could please ask everyone to mute their microphones, we'll mute them globally, but that would help us out. Now, as FCM moves forward with our commitment to reconciliation, I want to acknowledge that FCM's head office is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. As an organization, FCM endeavors to unlearn colonial mindsets and practices, grow in knowledge, and adapt our ways of working. As we continue to build meaningful relationships, we recognize the historic and ongoing contributions of Indigenous peoples and honor their leadership and partnership in shaping and strengthening communities across the country. I welcome you to acknowledge the land you are joining us from now. Before I turn things over to the experts, I have a few housekeeping items to mention. L'interprétation simultanée est disponible pour notre session aujourd'hui. Pour accéder à l'audio en français, il faut simplement cliquer la petite icône du globe au bas de l'écran vers la droite et sélectionner le français. If you do not select a language, you will hear the live audio in English. Je vous donne quelques secondes pour faire le choix de langue. If you'd like to ask a question, my colleagues have posted a link to a Slido page where you can write in questions to the panel. We plan to leave ample time for questions towards the end of today's session, which I will help facilitate by pulling your questions from that Slido page. Now, finally, please note this session is being recorded and will be available on demand on the FCM website. To get us underway, it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Matt Taché, Policy and Data Advisor with FCM. Matt works on our policy and research team where he leads a lot of FCM's work on infrastructure, municipal finance, and now international trade. Matt has contributed extensively to research on public transit, core infrastructure, and housing markets. He holds a master's degree in public policy and administration from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and a bachelor's degree in public affairs and policy management from Carleton University. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Evan. As was mentioned before, my name is Matt Pelty. I'm a policy advisor with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and I focus on infrastructure, transportation, finance, and more recently with our evolving world landscape, international trade. But when thinking about infrastructure, municipal infrastructure in particular, like roads, pipes, public transit, they're all critical to turning housing aspirations into reality. Across Canada, local governments are unlocking land for fast-tracking permit processes. They're also planning for growth. However, they're running into a common hurdle, which is crumbling infrastructure. Canada's infrastructure, and particularly municipal infrastructure, is at a critical juncture. According to Statistics Canada, the municipal infrastructure backlog is over $240 billion just for municipalities. And infrastructure might not be the trigger for the housing crisis, but it's a major piece of the puzzle that we cannot ignore. It goes beyond a simple funding issue. It's about timing, coordination, and the ability to get the job done. Municipalities are stepping up, but they need the right tools to match the urgency of the issue. In much of the country, municipalities face limits in their revenue tools, which contribute to the infrastructure deficit and limit the ability to support new housing. A new municipal funding model is needed to pay for housing enabling infrastructure. This will mean direct funding through mechanisms like the Canada Community Building Fund, the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, and the Housing Accelerator Fund. But it will also mean thinking outside the box and looking at innovative ways to finance infrastructure outcomes. Which is what makes today's presentation very exciting because we've partnered with the Canada Infrastructure Bank to examine how their flexible financing is helping deliver critical infrastructure in some of Manitoba's fastest growing communities. To discuss this initiative, we have some champions joining us today. Gordon Damon is the president of the Red River Group, a Canadian corporation specializing in real estate valuations, real property consulting, and property management. In 1998, Mr. Damon was elected to Niverville Town Council, and in 2002, he was acclaimed as mayor. He retired from active politics in 2006, but his experience in municipal government has provided him with a background in rural and urban development issues, the nuances of property assessment, and the value influence created by long-term planned development. Mr. Damon is a past president of the Appraisal Institute of Canada, Manitoba Provincial Council. He was a member of the Manitoba Municipal Board and has served as the chairperson for the Canadian Mennonite University Board of Governors. Mr. Damon currently serves as the chairperson for the Federal Payment in lieu of Tax Dispute Advisory Panel. Alex Ryan is an investment director at the Canada Infrastructure Bank, a Crown corporation and impact investor supporting projects in the public interest. Alex led the development of the CIB's Infrastructure for Housing initiative, which focuses on enabling public infrastructure for housing developments by working with the public sector, communities, and private sector developers. Alex also leads the CIB's Clean Power Priority sector, which have included projects in power generation, transmission, storage, and district energy. Alex is a CFA charter holder and holds a first-class honors in mathematics and economics from Warwick University. Jim Funk serves as the Reeve of the Rural Municipality of Hanover, Manitoba. First elected to municipal office in 2010 as a member of the local urban district committee for Grunthal, and later as a councillor for Ward 6, he became Reeve in 2022. Alongside his municipal role, Jim brings more than 30 years of experience as a local business owner, grounding his leadership in both community service and practical economic insight. As chair of the RSR Wastewater Cooperative, Jim plays a central role in advancing the regional wastewater project, which we will be hearing about today. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll invite Gordon to kick things off.
Thank you so much, and thanks for turning the audio on. Appreciate that. So for those west of Manitoba, good morning. For those east of Manitoba, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And Matt, thank you for that kind introduction. Probably the most important thing that I should state in all of this is that I am a recovering politician, as that was noted, and so have come to this place that I have the opportunity to serve with other municipalities with a great appreciation for local government. So for all of you joining this morning and or afternoon, just thank you for your role in making Canada a better place as we continue to build our communities. This morning, this afternoon, or today, a chance to really focus in on water and wastewater infrastructure. If we can go to the next slide, please. You can see that as we look at, just wait for the next slide. There we go. The need for our water and wastewater infrastructure is obviously something that we all know, that we work together and understand on a daily basis as local officials. And the need for local government to be able to deliver those particular services. They're critical assets, and as was noted, that there is an infrastructure deficit that is something that in some ways, I would say plagues, Western governments across the world, and in particular for us in Canada, ongoing challenges that we do need to address as we continue to grow. Not only address health and environment components of what we need to deliver as far as services, but also to mitigate and also manage and continue to address climate change matters as well. And so the infrastructure involvement that we have around water and wastewater are critical for that. And the challenge that we face across Canada is that the infrastructure investments are significantly expensive. And certainly both Brandon and the Red Seine Rat wastewater cooperative are keenly aware of that as we've been working through budgets as of late in the tendering process. And so what we're going to do today is have a chance to be able to look at uh, yeah, a path that was taken by both RSR and by the City of Brandon with the assistance of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, along with the province of Manitoba providing some background and also some infrastructure services for us as well through this process. And really to look at where this fit and the importance of this. And so for RSR, yes, there are some matters around aging infrastructure, but more so for RSR, which is happening certainly in some areas of the country, it's actually addressing rapid growth within our region. So for all of our municipal members, it's at minimum, 5 to 10% growth per census period. And for some of the municipalities involved in excess of 30%, some of the fastest growing municipalities across the country. And so growth is significant. And so we needed to be able to address that particular growth and ensure that we were well positioned to continue to allow investments to take place in the area. For the city of Brandon, that's aging infrastructure, probably more typical of more individuals that are joining us today. The city of Brandon, just around 50,000 people, and serves as the main service area for Western Manitoba, our second largest city. And the infrastructure that was focused and required there was specifically around water treatment, whereas RSR was around wastewater treatment. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about RSR. We set this up as a wastewater cooperative that was specific around some of the needs around the provincial legislation that we have here in regards to borrowing. We can talk a little bit about that a bit more if that becomes relevant, but I do recognize that across the country, there are different mechanisms in the way that the provinces will frame legislation as far as local government borrowing. So in Manitoba's case, there are limits that the province, through the Municipal Act, require for municipalities to either based on assessment or based on population as to what their borrowing limits are. And so one of the creative ways that we were able to address taking on this significant level of infrastructure debt was creating a cooperative with 6 municipal members coming together. As you can see there, the members that are there, the first 4 that you see, Taché, Hanover, Ritchot, and Niverville, were the original members, and due to the growth and the success of the cooperative, Broquerie and Salaberry joined a little bit into the journey of the original 4. The cooperative was formed in 2020. And the goal was to develop a regional wastewater treatment system to be able to do something together that any of the municipalities on their own couldn't do on their own. Because in areas such as southeastern Manitoba, it's mostly anaerobic treatment or lagoons as opposed to wastewater treatment through utilizing treatment plants. And so coming together to address both that growth and that infrastructure need through the encouragement of the province of Manitoba, we were introduced to the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and Alex is going to talk a little bit about that. And these two, RSR and Brandon, came together to meet the thresholds that CIB had in regards to the investment. So we can go to the next slide and have a look at Brandon's specific need, which is water treatment. And so what we see here through the investment that's being made with the assistance of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, along with one of the local credit unions in Brandon. And so it's a really organic effort of utilizing CIB's assistance in regards to their expertise on the lending side, and also accessing longer term debt opportunity backed by the government of Canada. So we had some very attractive interest rates. And then utilizing and partnering with a local credit union to ensure that we would have basically a local organic involvement so that we would have full circle opportunity in regards to economic development. The City of Brandon's investment will, as you can see there, support a number of new homes. It will also ensure ongoing clean drinking water for the existing 47,000 residents of the community. You can see what is being updated. It is an augmentation to their existing plant. It's not brand new, but an augmentation to make sure that they're meeting the regulatory requirements for the province of Manitoba. And we also had a small project added to it for that growth. Now, with the additional ability to treat more water, there was opportunity to also then build more homes, as what was noted. And so there was also a small lift station added to the project as well, just to bring full circle the opportunity of growth that was there. If you go to the other slide, we have some renderings. You can see the addition. The addition part is what you see in that blocked white. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the rear of the facility and the ongoing investment that's taking place there. And the next slide is just the front facade or schematic that you see of the elevation of the building, so that the citizens of Brandon are able to have a good look at the importance of water treatment for them. So to talk a little bit about RSR and its wastewater infrastructure, I'm going to turn it over to Reeve Funk. And I think, Reeve Funk, you'll have to unmute yourself. While they're working on unmuting Reeve Funk, I'll just jump in with just a few comments about RSR, and then ask Reeve Funk to take over when he's unmuted. So the ongoing aspect of the growth that we had mentioned before, the 6 municipalities have significant growth that's taking place. And because of that, we needed to be able to address and look at providing treatment for a large number of individuals. Currently, around 35 to 40,000 population from the 6 municipalities, but providing capacity for over 70,000 into the future. The development and the ability to actually develop, over 17,000 new homes, but as importantly, to be able to maintain existing commercial and industrial activity that's here. The southeastern Manitoba is known for its intensive livestock area, so from both the feather industry and also from the dairy industry. We have 2 very significant key players in the area that provide hundreds of jobs in our area. New Bothwell Cheese that produces some of the finest cheeses in the world based on the awards that they win. And then also Granny's Poultry, which is now owned by a cooperative, and so they do processing of both turkey and also chicken, and both of those required wastewater treatment mechanically to ensure that they would be able to continue to grow. And so this adds to the economic output and development of the province. Within the staged process that we have ongoing involvement with the wastewater treatment facility, which will be the first phase. And then secondly, thereafter, once the treatment plant is in place, there'll be nearly 100 kilometers of conveyancing pipe to connect all of the communities together to bring the affluent into the wastewater treatment plant, which will be located about 2.5 to 3 kilometers north of the community of Niverville. And the treated water will then, in an environmentally safe way, then be returned back into the Red River, which will increase the level of a treatment specifically around phosphorus and nitrogen for our municipalities to protect the lakes that we have here in the province. So I see that
Sure.
Refunk is still muted. I'm assuming they'll work on that. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex.
Yeah, I figured if Jim's still muted for the time being, maybe we could skip 3 slides forward, and then we can come back to Refunk's slides once he's unmuted. So in terms of the CIB is a federal crown corporation established under the Canada Infrastructure Bank Act back in 2017. We invest across 5 priority sectors, and I now note that it looks like Jim is unmuted, and I'll let him go first, and we can come back to this later. Thanks.
So Evan, if we can go back to the slides, Refunk can actually just go through. Actually, you can probably advance this one and then just go to the larger overview, and Refunk can just give a bit of an overview as to the slides and what we're doing there.
Yeah, so this is one of the slides that we have here today, and the RSR is as Gordon mentioned before, is a very important project here within the municipalities, because of what Gordon related to before, is some of our communities are in need of lagoons, and this is just one project that would eliminate lagoon space and free up a lot of land also. So there's a lot of value to what we are proposing here. I would like to just add to that the RSR is a very we're excited to get it going. We would like to have started last year already, but that simply hasn't come. But with CIB being on board, we are just very grateful for CIB for partnering up with us and making this project something that is a doable project.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. So I mentioned who the CIB is as the Crown Corporation. We invest across 5 priority sectors. They are public transit, clean power, green infrastructure, broadband, and then trade and transportation. And we're an impact investor. And what that means is we do seek to be repaid with interest. So we're not a funding program, but we are a financing program. However, our primary return on investment isn't the interest that we earn. It's really the impact outcomes that we help create. So across those sectors, public transit, we'd be looking at transit ridership, clean power, it's greenhouse gas emissions reductions, green infrastructure, which actually includes water and wastewater, can be the number of households that are unlocked through that, and then broadband and trade and transportation have similar impact outcomes. So we really measure our success based on the outcomes that we produce for Canadians, rather than the interest that is earned on our investments, and that allows us to be offer concessionary and patient capital while still producing great results for Canada. And I've got a slide that follows this one about the Infrastructure for Housing Initiative. So I'll go into that one. I think it's on some details on the following slide, but in terms of eligibility, projects need to be at least $50 million in size. They need to create incremental revenues for the municipality sufficient to repay the investment that we're making. As I mentioned, we're a financing organization and not a granting organization. For public sector borrowers, it can be a Canadian municipality, it can be municipally owned corporations. We are open to either. and in the case of the RSR, that you have a cooperative there. There needs to be, and 4 and 5 are kind of a given the stages of the initiative. It needs to involve significant upgrades to infrastructure, capacity expansions that allow for the housing growth that to occur. I'll caveat the $50 million limit. We'll talk a lot about bundling today, but I also wanted to mention that for Indigenous and Northern communities, we can do smaller loans under our existing Indigenous community infrastructure initiative. Following slide talks a bit more in detail about the Infrastructure for Housing Initiative. So this was created back in, say, late 2023, early 2024, to respond to some really poignant issues as it relates to the housing crisis. We'd received an updated statement of priorities and accountabilities letter from our minister within housing infrastructure and communities to ask us what we could do more to help housing growth and capitalize new housing growth. And we are not, we're not CMHC. We don't invest in housing itself. We're also not Build Canada Homes. But what we can do is help to invest in the areas that we already do to catalyze new housing development to happen. Because we did speak to a lot of municipalities that you've got a hold on issuing new building permits because you're up against a ceiling, you're up against a capacity constraint, and our investments in infrastructure can help to unlock that. If we go to the next slide, this gives you an idea as to the types of infrastructure that are included. This is generally aligned with those sectors that I mentioned earlier, but a bit of a drill down on what we see as the potential municipal infrastructure, depending on where you are in the country. That would be water, wastewater, and stormwater, and the conveyancing between those, local civil works, roads, bridges, etc., and local transit. So connectivity as well, but again, depending on the region you're in this country, that may be managed by a different entity. These are all kind of eligible costs from our perspective, and where we invest alongside banks and credit unions in municipal infrastructure, we typically provide half of the financing, and alongside that party to provide the other half. I'll start using the term bundling a bit more here, because this was really a great opportunity for the CIB, brought forward to us by the Strategic Initiatives and Alternative Delivery Branch at the province of Manitoba. They brought forward 2 projects which were being developed on very similar timeframes in similar sectors in a similar region, and we were able to look at them collectively. And also within each of these 2 projects, the one with the City of Brandon and one with RSR, you look at the City of Brandon one, and it's actually an amalgamation of a couple of projects in itself. So we're aware that the CIB's investment limits, in this case of 50 million within the Infrastructure for Housing Initiative, can be hard to reach in some circumstances. But we're open to the City of Brandon looking at upgrading its water treatment plant capacity and performing some upgrades at the same time as building a new lift station in the southwest corner of the city there. And likewise, it was really great to see the communities within the RSR cooperative come together and really build some infrastructure that's going to be more efficient for the combined use. And that helped us also to reach a minimum investment threshold as well, because we're looking at individual communities that might find it hard to access CIB financing, but when they came together, it really helped create something that was at a higher scale that allows us to participate. And great benefits for us, as noted on the slide here. It really diversifies our outcomes, similar project timelines. We get an increased project size. We brought these forward to our management and our board for sign off simultaneously alongside one another. And we were able to get them signed off together. So it was viewed as a single investment, even though it was taking place across 2 borrowers here. Yeah, I think there's a great conversation to be had about these projects. Happy to jump into a discussion. And I know there's a QR code on the screen there if you'd like to get in touch and learn more about projects.
With that, thank you so much, folks, for the presentation on that. And to that point as well, we have put in our chat function a Slido link, which so you can access and provide questions here. I've seen a couple of them come in right now. I've got a few structured questions that I want to just quickly get through first, but we'll definitely I'm going to meld them with some of the questions coming in as follow-ups. But I guess to kick things off, I'd like to turn to Gordon and Jim for a second. We were hearing a bit about the nature of the partnership you have. We're seeing you created a cooperative. You've been getting financing through credit union with the as well as with the provincial government. So you had different lending institutions. You had a lot of municipalities at the table. You had the provincial government. What was the initial pitch conversation like among the municipalities in the cooperative? And how did you build trust among partners to make that happen? Oh, and
That's
you
a
should
great
be able
question,
to
Matt.
unmute yourselves now. I think
Yeah,
we've got it.
that's
Thanks
super,
to our
Matt.
folks
Yeah,
on the team for getting that sorted.
perfect. Thank you. So, Matt, thanks for that. I'll jump in first and then ask Refunk to speak from it specifically from an elected official's perspective. But the unique nature of southeastern Manitoba, and I don't, pretend to state that this is going to be everywhere across the country, but it did start, one municipality at a time. So the initiating side was that the town of Niverville itself was having to expand and look at its wastewater infrastructure because of the growth. And when they recognized that because of the regulatory side, they weren't able to actually proceed realistically with continued lagoon or anaerobic treatment, and they needed to move to mechanical treatment, the cost factor became frankly sticker shock. And so what they did is that they first reached out to the surrounding municipalities that had similar type of values, had worked on other projects together, quite frankly, both either through sports, recreation, even internet broadband. So there was an existing relationship between those municipalities already, and it was one municipality at a time, and then bringing each to the table. And then the trust, I would say that the trust probably came most formally into place when the municipalities together, the first four, work through what was meant in regards to the cooperative ideals and the structure of the cooperative itself, so that there was not only a relationship that existed, but that relationship was backed up within a legal document to make sure that everyone felt protected and heard. So I would say starting, basically knocking on your neighbor's door, starting one neighbor at a time, then bringing everyone together. If there's an existing relationship, then solidify that relationship to seal the trust through a legal format. Those would be my recommendations. I'm not sure if Jim has anything to add beyond that.
Thank you, Gord. No, Gord, you will have more knowledge on this than I, because I came into it, into this position just as you already had started this wastewater project. But I do recall the trust within council. I think the project itself and the need for it within our municipalities and communities, that kind of sold itself. The project is like I said before, it is a project that is going to serve us for years on end, and we never have to worry about wasting land again, and we don't have to worry about addressing lagoons once this takes place.
I also don't want to underestimate the involvement actually of CIB in this situation, and then also the encouragement of FCM to actually look at broader partnerships between municipalities. So FCM would have, and this is credit to FCM for already seeding the idea of broader partnerships between municipal governments. I think that was important. And then CIB coming alongside, frankly, provided some credibility so that the elected officials would know that, you know, if CIB was walking alongside and involved, there was a level of sophistication that was being brought forward as well, beyond the cooperative. So, and as you know, as Jim indicated, there was such a significant need. Now that the need was identified, how could we find the structure to pull it together? But there is no doubt that without having that some of that pre-existing relationship in place, it would have probably been a little bit more difficult to build that trust. So we know, you know, anecdotally, some municipalities have long-term history where they don't get along together, and some municipalities have long-term history where they do. In these situations where we're looking at bundling that Alex talked about, having that pre-existing relationship certainly made a difference.
And I actually want to delve just a little further into the piece around the partnership that was created there. We had a question from our Slido asking about more so about the involvement of the province, not just from a financing standpoint, but from an operational standpoint. Did the province assist with the CIB application that you folks made?
In a broader perspective, yes, they did provide some assistance. So they were at the table when we began. So as Alex indicated, Strategic Infrastructure Alternative Delivery Branch is a unit within provincial government, central services. In our case, every province can have a different way of structuring it. But the focus is being able to actually structure larger infrastructure deals that are required for the province. And so their involvement was actually fairly critical. They came alongside to be able to ensure that there was a viable partnership in the bundling between the City of Brandon and RSR. Both of those individual entities were already doing what they were doing, but the province was fairly critical on bringing that together. The province was already involved with RSR to an extent in regards to the broader infrastructure grant program through the federal government through some of the funding applications that we made. And then where the province was helpful, they actually engaged legal counsel apart from the legal counsel that was involved with the City of Brandon and RSR to be able to provide just some oversight and some advice and provide a level of comfort to the group. So yeah, the province's involvement was fairly significant. I don't know how that would work in larger provinces, but certainly in a smaller province like Manitoba, it was quite helpful.
I want to pivot here to Alex for a second. I just want to discuss potentially some of the more technical aspects of the thresholds that municipalities had to meet. And this is sort of also bundling a few of the Slido questions that have come in. One question was if there are other funders, but the overall total is above the 50 million limit or 50 million kind of threshold, can we borrow less than 50 million? This is from an individual in a municipality who's not sure yet regarding where they would get funding from elsewhere. And then a kind of a second question on this was what qualifies a municipality as a northern community for a lower threshold than 50 million? And I guess my editorial that be is that sort of, are we using provincial norths and territories for that? What's our kind of cutoff in those pieces? So Alex, I guess I'll turn it over to you to discuss the thresholds and limits piece a little more.
Feel like I'm going to be able to give a really good answer to one of those pieces, and I'm going to have to probably defer on the other one. On the dollar values, and I can understand why this is confusing because even the CIB sometimes says the same things different ways. Generally speaking, and I'm going to say outside of the Infrastructure for Housing Initiative, CIB establishes minimum investment thresholds that it has to make. So in most sectors, that's actually $100 million of our money. And it means projects are typically, 200, 250 plus in size. We recognize the need in the Infrastructure for Housing Initiative to reduce that number, to try to bring in some more medium-sized municipalities into the mix, or give options for cooperatives such as RSR. And the $50 million figure that was quoted is the combined total of what we would do alongside the credit union. So we could potentially do 25 and the credit union does 25 in that example. So good question because we often get ourselves mixed up on it, but it's typically project costs net of grants that has to be in excess of 50 million. So you have to be financing at least 50 million. And on the Indigenous and Northern, yeah, really hard for me to provide an answer. There's a managing director that leads our Indigenous and Northern infrastructure investments that would provide a much better answer. I would just encourage you to reach out to the CIB email address to get a formal response on that. Generally, it's the rationale there is, you know, typically that Indigenous Community Infrastructure Initiative is meant for serving remote northern populations whose populations are typically majority Indigenous. That may not be wholly Indigenous, but majority. I don't have the black and white answer, unfortunately, so I would encourage you to reach out for a firmer one.
Appreciate though the clarity nonetheless on the different kind of threshold elements to that. Jim and Gordon, I'm going to turn back to you folks for a second. As you've been live too, and as you've kind of both alluded to, there's some challenges that municipalities often face in projects involving lending. Sometimes it's provincial borrowing limits. Sometimes it's taxation rules that make debt-funded projects challenging to be viable. FCM has been live to this issue, and we've been exploring with the federal government ways to attract more private capital to municipal infrastructure projects, like opening up the municipal bond market is one of our more recent kind of areas of interest. We also recognize that the federal government has the opportunity to work with provincial and territorial partners to improve the viability of alternative financing models. But looking locally, how did the governance structure of the RSR wastewater cooperative help streamline some of the decision making across the municipalities? Were there any formal agreements or shared planning tools that made coordination easier?
So essentially coming together as a cooperative, and again, through a lens of Manitoba's legislative environment, what was helpful with the cooperative was that the municipalities are able to provide a guarantee to the cooperative during construction, which was fairly critical to the financing components of the project, without having to incur specifically debt the way that our legislation reads, because guarantee is not considered a debt. And so that was actually fairly critical. I don't know if that's available in all provinces, but that was, quite frankly, a make or break in the way that things were being put together. The other thing I want to add, and maybe Alex can speak a little bit more to that, which was as critical as the legislation and making sure that we could come together. That was the idea of the cooperative. It also functioned well of being able to have all the municipalities have, basically equal voices at the table, again, through the cooperative model. But what was really critical for CIB in making this work beyond the legislative environment that municipalities in Manitoba face is what Alex talked around about patient capital. Again, it's not granting. The investment has to be repaid, but there's an environment of patience in that repayment process and flexibility. So that is one thing that was really, really critical. They can do more than actually the credit unions. And because of what they did, we were able to nudge the credit unions to match some of that. And having them alongside provided the credit union system more confidence. So together, that was a critical piece with CIB. And then finally, municipalities can go out and, at least in Manitoba, they can take out a debenture, which is then backed by the province of Manitoba. But that debenture rate is still higher than what the Government of Canada bond rate is. And I think bringing in that particular tool was significant in regards to what those long-term borrowing costs would be, and allowed us to be able to frame the project and make it sustainable long-term without creating ratepayer pushback to the extent that we would have seen otherwise had we gone through traditional borrowing avenues that have been done in the past, again, because of the significant cost right now that we're facing around infrastructure projects. So maybe a little bit too technical, but that's stressing I just want to stress patient capital. That's a critical piece that I think is undersold in relation to municipalities and what CIB brings to the table.
No, I like you've given us a lot of key takeaway concepts from this, like patient capital, and I liked earlier when we were talking about even like the building trust one neighbor at a time. I really like kind of that way of kind of talking about when kind of bringing a partnership like this together. So it was great to see such advancement on this piece. I want to ask just follow up with Jim for a second here. As the chair of RSR, from your perspective, what were the biggest challenges in coordinating all these municipalities to get to that shared vision? How did you overcome it? And on that, and when looking at a project like RSR, how was growth factored into it, in recognizing that every community might be at a different spot, demographically speaking?
I think, I think, I think Gordon has been a huge part of our success, both in explaining and I think the RSR project itself has possibly sold itself to the communities or municipalities. Like Gordon mentioned before, we started off with 4 and then we had 2 that came in at a later time, simply because the cost of building a new lagoon is so high. Our neighbors to the east had a quote in building a lagoon, and that was very much the same price as their buy-in to this wastewater project. So if we take that into account, we cannot but go forward and make this happen. So again, I would like to just stress how thankful we are with our partners or like CIB for investing with us, and also the province and feds and Access Credit Union. We have a number of partners here, and we are very grateful for that.
And turning to that partner for a second, I want to just ask you, Alex, what was it about the CIB's financing approach which makes it unique, and how does that help municipalities? And I guess to that point as well, what sort of technical support or advisory services did the CIB provide beyond just simply financing?
Yeah, sure. I knew this question before, and I'd written a short answer to it, and I'm worried that I'm going to start repeating a lot of what other people are saying. So the CIB as a federal crown corporation can take a pretty unique position on pricing and risk. We are more patient than most sources of capital. We can encourage other sources of capital to come with us and share in some of that risk with us and share in some of that patience with us. We want to be alongside Access on this project for the full term of our loan. We can be flexible in the structuring of our repayments or our interest to try to match with community growth as well. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, there are different rules around that, but we can either start repayments low and then grow them over time as the community grows, or we can start interest low and we can grow that over time as the community grows. Really, once the capacity to repay is greater, we can then have that actually flow to the CIB. But if people take longer to grow, then our interest rate does stay low for longer, or our repayments do stay lower for longer. In terms of advisors, I'll firstly say it was critical that the communities not only had some independent advisors for themselves, but also that they shared those advisors. So Gordon worked across both Brandon and the RSR projects, and he worked on behalf of all the RSR communities. That was a huge help to be dealing from a commercial and financial side with a single party. That can't be understated. The Gordon also mentioned that the province paid for some legal advice, which helped to benefit both Brandon and RSR as well. Again, single counterparty makes things a lot easier to bring this forward as a single investment. And in terms of CIB's contributions here, we don't pay for the community's own advisors, but we do bring our own advisors to the table at our own cost. So we brought our own legal advisors and paid for those ourselves, our own independent engineers to review some of the estimates and schedules and levels of potential risk and mitigants, which benefits both the CIB as a lender and the communities as the borrowers as well. And insurance advisors. We brought an insurance advisor to the table as well. We paid for that ourselves. Again, it was doing an independent review of some of the hard work that had already been done by the communities, but at our own expense, which we do for municipal borrowers.
And I should add what Alex indicated there, what for both RSR and for Brandon, what became extremely helpful in that process, their own independent advice within a partnership and an understanding was actually extremely helpful for the municipal partners, because obviously the credit unions had their own legal advice. And then all the municipal partners had their own engineering firms involved as well. So having that additional level of involvement from their legal advice, from their engineering advice, as well as their insurance advice, was really, really beneficial, because there were times when their experts actually nudged our experts. And further to that, it provided, I think, and Jim can speak to this, but I think for the local councillors, an additional level of confidence that there was actually a third independent party that was overlooking this, to make sure that the advice that they were getting directly from their advisors, whether it was myself or their own legal team or their own engineers, had a second sober thought. And I don't know if we can recreate this exactly the same way, but I on the bundling and having CIB at the center, it is really what made this work. Without CIB, I'm going to be upfront. This just wouldn't have happened. We would not be proceeding with these two projects.
And on the note of another project that another group is proposing right now, we got a question from our Slido, and I'll also invite others in the room who are attendees. Feel free to continue to send your questions into Slido. We're trying to bundle them in with our kind of structured questions here, so keep sending them my way, and I'll see how I can action them. But one of them that has come from a participant was, they've mentioned that their municipality has a large land mass of over 120,000 kilometers, but the population is approximately 65,000. They have two major centers that are 75 kilometers apart. And I guess this is to Alex, but also to everyone, to all of our panelists here. What are your suggestions on partnerships for a kind of a layout that is this far apart?
Okay, I'll go first. I would love to dive into the example in more detail with the person who asked the question. I'll just say that first, because I think we can provide a kind of a bit of an obscure answer, not knowing some specifics of, for example, the terrain between those two centers, and what the feasibility is in providing a connection and for centralized infrastructure, or indeed what the type of infrastructure deficit there is that is at issue, whether it is water or wastewater, and what each of those two locations is in relation to, outfall points or other water masses. So I think with all those things on the table, if there's unencumbered terrain between the two, then you can look at that. For the example given in RSR, look at the two communities as distinct, what it would take for them to each expand their own infrastructure systems, and perform a second piece of analysis, which is, what does a centralized treatment system look like, and how much does that cost? And it might surprise you But obviously the answer to that question is contingent on so many factors that I just don't know about those communities.
I'll
I
just
don't know.
quickly, I'll quickly add, Matt, to what Alex indicated, that it's very interesting, the numbers that are there. So, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that from the southeast perspective of La Broquerie to the northwest perspective of Ritchot is at least 120 kilometers in distance. And so there's similarity there. Our population is actually smaller than 65,000. It's about 35 to 40,000, and it's 13 communities. So that ability to pull that together is similar to what Alex indicated, is to look to see, is there validity and value? Is there, basically what's the value for money proposition to be able to actually develop this together? And so it may be, placing the treatment center, if it's wastewater, in the middle of the two, and then actually bringing, piping together. So there would have to be some engineering overview, but Alex is absolutely correct that in most cases right now, I would say, based on actual capital infrastructure costs, that if you can get this down to one plant between even two communities, you're probably still going to be less costly than doing two individual ones, even with some of that conveyance system involved. But we'd have to look at the actual examples. But yeah, the distance is not a problem because we have that with RSR, so we've done it. Jim, I don't know if there's anything there from your side.
Yeah, no, you're right. We are well within the 100 kilometers from one end to the other. So it certainly, like Niverville is very central, which we have done. It's very close to being center. So that, that works for us here. So
I would add maybe that given the scales that we're talking about here, and if those two communities within the municipality are that far apart, you may also find that there is a neighboring municipalities community you might be able to draw. Rather than a straight line, it turns into a triangle, and actually the distances become smaller for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And to quickly close things off before we pass things back to Evan to do some final housekeeping remarks, rapid fire answer from you, Alex. What's next for the CIB? Are there other innovative approaches on the horizon to help municipalities like our friends in Manitoba on building housing enabling infrastructure?
A quick one. Okay. All right. So we're continuing to do the work we do with municipalities directly. We have a number of discussions ongoing under this very similar model. We've also recently broadened our infrastructure, our housing initiative, to work directly with housing developers, where they are responsible for contributions or actually building the infrastructure themselves. And this is not the case in many municipalities, but in some of the larger municipalities in particular, where the offering that CIB has in terms of access to capital and patient capital, they can actually finance relatively easily themselves. There's some benefit in loans directly to developers that are building that infrastructure that keys are going to end up being handed over to the municipality.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for keeping things brief. Evan, I'm going to let you close things off, but I'm going to say thank you to you gentlemen as well. And Evan, I know you've got some closing remarks for us.
Yeah, just before we wrap, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the chat where Kira Edwards from the CIB has dropped a couple links to allow you to get in touch with the folks at the CIB should there be anything you want to discuss with them, as well as some information about their Indigenous communities programs. And I wanted to let everyone know that there's a question in the chat. We will be sending out the slides from today's presentation along with the recording in the coming days. Let me just say thank you to Reeve Funk, to Alex, Gordon, and Matt. Thank you also to Canada Infrastructure Bank for your support and for enabling this excellent example of regional collaboration to get things done. As I mentioned already, the recording of today's conversation will be posted to fcm.ca in the coming days and sent to all registrants by email. So please feel free to share it as a resource with your colleagues. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, our next FCM Collective webinar will take place on November 5th and is entitled Modular Momentum, Accelerating New Home Construction. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for joining us.